Welcome to episode 3 of the Dr. Stephen Greer podcast. Dr. Greer, it's very good to connect with you today. Lots of exciting stuff happening. How are you doing?
Oh, I'm doing all right. I spent most of the night dealing with some of the fallout from the tabloid show that came out last night. And so I want to just comment on this a little bit. Jake Barber and I've worked together, and I first met him about a year and a half, maybe 20 months ago. He's a special forces guy who is also embedded with a major aerospace company. Now, I know what all those affiliations are. He did not disclose it. Now, the important part of what came out, if you take out all the other noise and the production itself on that News Nation show, is that he and a group of other people are beginning to put their toe in the water, releasing information and what they've been involved with in retrieving extraterrestrial vehicles, or the pop culture now, our government acronym term now is NHI, non-human intelligence craft. And there is a great deal more than what you saw in that episode. So the original plan, just to let people know what was originally thought to be done, and its evolution, some may say devolution over the last few months, is that there was going to be a collection of all that hard evidence of these operations, the craft, the operators, the locations, et cetera, and so on. And that was going to be done anonymously. They were not going to reveal who they were for OPSEC's operational security reasons and their own safety, both legally and personally. As you saw on the show, people have been killed. He didn't go into details. I know the details, and there have been recent fatalities related to these operations, people trying to come forward. And we're at this inflection point where we need these people to come forward full Monty, right? However, the problem is the United States government is lagging in instituting the protections, the executive orders, the congressional bills to protect and to make a pathway out of these operations that have been run illegally, so that the people involved are not prosecuted. They have amnesty, they have physical protection, and there's a robust effort in law enforcement here and abroad to get these corrupt and illegal projects under control, which is a very heavy lift. There's a separate team that I'm advising is involved with that part of it. That's separate from Jake Barber and his whistleblower team. But I've introduced them, so they know each other. Now, the issue here becomes the commingling, and the whole title of this show really needs to be the disclosure mosaic. And I want to just unpack a little bit from a 35 years on into this perspective. And as I started out in this, I made a lot of mistakes. We still make mistakes. We're human. We're fallible. And what happens is that, when you have a piece here and a piece there, you're going to make an assessment based on the intelligence you have. But it's never quite complete. Never quite complete. And so what we have to do, and what the Disclosure Project's been doing for a third of a century, is collecting all these little pieces from 1,000 points of information who are whistleblowers that I've debriefed and met with over the last third of a century, and try to put this picture, this mosaic together. Because what you'll find is that someone like Mr. Barber and his guys were read into a very specific operation, and even that operation, they had specific tasks. And he will tell you this, and he was not read in to what was going on, for example, where those craft went, and then what happened to them. He knows, he's spoken to people, but his firsthand knowledge is very specific. So what I've had to do by connecting the dots of hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of these type of whistleblowers over the decades, and you'll see this if you go to dpiarchive.com, there's 762 listed. Now, some of their names are redacted because they've not agreed to come forward like Jake Barber has and his guys. But what the bigger problem is if you only have that slice of the picture, even if you've been an operator, a special forces operator in that world for decades or a couple decades, you're not going to necessarily know the whole mosaic. And so that's where you get into trouble. And that's where I've seen many of these whistleblowers, they get caught up in a media effort like this was, that then puts in spurious and unrelated material that actually is not useful and helpful. In fact, it is deleterious to the truth. And we're going to talk about that. One thing about me, love me or hate me, I'm not running for the mayor of Crazy Town, ufology. I'm just going to lay it out there what the truth is, because my responsibility, I'm here in Washington right now because I have to go to some meetings with the incoming administration figures. And there's a higher responsibility to get the truth out there in a way that isn't harmful to the future human consciousness. So I just wanted to give you that concept that there's this big mosaic that we've created, but it isn't because I had one, let's call it deep throat source, like in Watergate, where they had a deep throat source that told them all about the skullduggery of the Watergate thing. No, this is too complex. It's hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people like Mr. Barber and people on his team. And so that's what the Disclosure Project is. That's what we are. And so I have to work with many, many people who are starting out as they come out from behind the shadows. First of all, you can tell there's palpable fear there, and rightly so. Secondly, they can only speak to what they know. And then if they fall into the, let's say, influence of people who, for whatever reasons, might want to do a show on this, which I had advised specifically against, by the way, this particular avenue. But, these guys are their own people and they have their own ideas, and they are not my employees. And we consult and we discuss and we have differences, and that's how humans are. So, but the problem is then you get into what kind of a capture is that? Now, I use the term capture for when something legitimate comes out and where there's academic capture on this subject, where there's undue influence to alter the results of a study. Famously, the Condon Committee in 1969 that closed Project Blue Book, the Air Force Project Blue Book, was closed through a CIA capture of Professor Condon and members of that committee to give a predetermined outcome, meaning there's nothing to see here. That is proven in CIA documents we have, and they're in our archive. So this goes on in media. So there's media capture, there's academic capture, there's government capture, there's the capture and the gaslighting of members of Congress and of presidents. Now, I have personally witnessed all of this, and it's not a pretty story. It's always disheartening when it happens, but it certainly isn't unexpected. I hate that. Unfortunately, I'd like to say that this is new and shocking, but it is not. It is de rigueur. I'll just say it's de rigueur. And let's talk about the media on this end. There are minor tabloid entities beginning to push into this that may well be set up as a cutout for intelligence operations to capture the information and then distort it or alter it, or be sure that it's discredited. For example, we know from Bill Graham, who worked very closely with the National Enquirer, that the founder of the National Enquirer was in the CIA Psychological Warfare Programs Division, PSYOPs. And he was set up and sent out from the CIA and also funded by some mafia money to start the National Enquirer. This is all a matter of record. And they were the media outlet that UFO-related disclosures, even legitimate material, was sent to, because the tabloid, the National Enquirer, was so discredited as a credible news source that by associating the subject with the National Enquirer, it was intrinsically defamed. It was neutralized that way. So you have to understand how these games are played, and I just wanted to give that perspective historically. Now, in this particular instance, what's very important is that there's a group of whistleblowers who have worked directly on these retrieval programs and in other areas. And for example, that particular footage of this egg-shaped object, which they are saying is non-human extraterrestrial. We know that there are definitely small extraterrestrial life forms that are on the order of a couple to 3.5 feet tall that travel in these very pearlescent. It's not just white paint. When you said pearlescent craft, it's a very unusual material. And they're not very big, 20, 25 feet across. But if you're only 3 feet tall or something, that's a nice, it'd be like me being in a 40-foot diameter disc because I'm 6'4". So I think that we know that is a type of NHI craft or ET craft. Now, where it gets a little confusing is that in the show, they said this is like the one captured by the Navy pilots that was white. But see, this is the lack of research and knowledge by the producers. That craft was from the Lockheed Skunk Works and man-made. So remember, you're going to have craft that are non-human, and then there are the copycats, the facsimiles. And those have been created on purpose because they can engage in deceptive operations or false flag operations with those man-made craft that look indistinguishable at this point from a non-human NHI ET craft. So I'm giving all of you this information as perspective as we go through and unpack what was on that particular show, and some of the other misinformation in there. That's a key one. And anyone astute who knows the material, people like Michael Schratt and others that have studied the man-made retrievals versus the extraterrestrial ones, and just as Jake said, often you'll be on a retrieval of an advanced technology, anti-grav out of the Lockheed Skunk Works or Northrop Grumman or Raytheon. And when those go bad and they have malfunctions, there is a team that's identical to the team that goes out and gets the ET ones because they're both at that level of classification, the Delta Force guys and these Special Forces guys. And I've debriefed many, many of them, like Jake Barber. And in fact, recently we have a witness who was going to come forward last year, year before in 2023 at our National Press Club event, who was on a retrieval team in a different area from where Jake is operating, but in the northern Nevada test range. And you can go in our archive and see that. He was going to come to Congress and also to Aero, but he was threatened by these folks who wanted him to be quiet, and they had embedded child pornography on his phone and on his computers and said, we'll put you in prison for the rest of your life if you take one more step forward with Dr. Greer. So that happens all the time also. Now that should be something where the people doing that are arrested for witness intimidation, because these people are coming forward exposing a criminal operation. In other words, those operations that, and he won't say this because he's being told not to, I will, that Mr. Barber in are absolutely unknown and unsupervised by the president and the Congress and are a priori criminal enterprises. This can be proven in any court. Now, what that means is that until the U.S. government has enough of a intelligence briefing and a focus to fix that, these courageous men, and I know Jake is a brother and he's a friend, Jake Barber, and these guys are really at risk because the U.S. government, the Congress, and the White House have failed to advance what we recommended to President Bill Clinton. You can see this in our archive in 1994 and 1995. It's making progress. I've seen drafts of executive orders doing what we're asking for that are on the desk now. Frankly, I've seen them. I won't say how I got them or where I got them from. They're real. And so there's great progress. But within the current, let's say the current state of the art on this, these guys are coming forward very cautiously because originally they were just going to give everything to us. We were going to put it out there on blockchain and it would have been done. But when they decided to come out personally, then it's personal. And let me talk to you about that. You have families. I mean, I have 4 children, 12 grandchildren, wife. You have friends. You have, your own freedom at risk. I've been threatened. I mean, I mean, Lou Elizondo has openly called me a terrorist and a traitor for doing what I'm doing. I mean, that's on the public record, by the way. So you have these people who are very slick disinformation operatives who can intimidate people or capture them and move them in ill-advised directions. Now, whenever a new person comes forward, one of my institutional frustrations is that I've seen this, it's like wash, rinse, repeat, wash, rinse, repeat 1,000 times, where people started to come forward and they get diverted into some fiasco, like a tabloid show or what have you. So that's something that I advise against. But again, I don't control what these folks do. I can advise, and then they're going to do what they're going to do. Now, ultimately, we all learn from the school of hard knocks. I'm always getting called in situations because of who I am. And every time I think I've learned every lesson, there's a new lesson that comes along that knocks me in the head. So that's just the nature of life on Earth. Unless you're the supreme being, you don't know everything. I don't, no one does, you're going to make mistakes. But the good news on all this is that while there's a lot of controversy about that egg, and by the way, that was not his footage. Another person at a similar operation, which is corroborative, who hasn't come forward, sent that in. This is important. Some people say it's great. I said no, because you have multiple operators who've been in projects where they have retrieved virtually the identical type NHI craft at separate locations and times. Now, that person has not unmasked themselves. So I'm just saying, I know a great deal more that I can talk about on this podcast because of confidences I keep, which I'm not thrilled about, honestly, but this is the world I reside in. Just like I'm not going to talk about who I'm going to meet with here in Washington until those people are out of office. And it's just a gentleman's agreement, and it's decency and ethics. But the really big news also in this is that he confirmed that not only are these operations ongoing, but that it involves multiple sites and that it involves a very advanced technique for bringing these craft down. And I want to talk about this. He talked about psionics, and I when he first described that program to me, I already knew it existed. Everybody's heard of the CIA remote viewing program. But what people didn't know about is that they had taken the concepts of close encounters of the fifth kind, the CE5 contact. You can go get the app, you'll see what it is, that trains people to be peaceful ambassadors to these civilizations, right? And they took it, and back some years ago, before Mr. Barber was involved, began programs using electronics and drugs and other techniques to get these what are called P3 operators, these psionic operators, to be able to use consciousness to interface with the trans-dimensional electronic systems that are part of the guidance and control systems of these non-human spacecraft. And they succeeded. Now, he has told me, and others have told me, most people in those programs end up being killed or dying because of the rigor of it, or end up in a coma. But the ones that survive can be very, very accurate. But what they're doing, they're using a consciousness matter interface, sort of like a supercharged version of what Elon Musk wants to do with Neuralink, but through non-locality of consciousness, through the consciousness field, which has been very well documented and proven. If you don't know about that, go after this podcast to see Close Encounters of the Fifth Kind, the movie, and it's on YouTube and elsewhere, and it'll blow your mind. So those programs, instead of using that technology, let's call it consciousness technology interface sciences, for peaceful contact, which is what Close Encounters of the Fifth Kind are doing, it's been used as a weapon system. It's 180 degrees opposite of what we're doing. Now, the good news is, because this is getting confirmed now by some special forces gentlemen, what we'll then do is advise, all right, this is what's possible, but instead of doing it to capture these craft, or as they say, summon them, we don't summon ET craft or NHI craft, we invite them. It's a diplomatic protocol. It's not a forced military invasive effort. So the consciousness behind it is totally 180 degrees different from these programs that have been used to capture these craft and bring them down, take control. Basically, you're hijacking the control systems of these craft, bringing them within range, and then hitting them with an electromagnetic pulse weapon and a scalar weapon that then causes them to crash or come down. Sometimes in a controlled descent, so they're intact. Sometimes they crash into smithereens. So I know all the details of this. All right,
Dr. Greer,
yeah.
How could a super advanced ETI step into this trap?
Oh, great question. Here's the reason why. I remember when I was asked back in the early 90s by some Clinton folks, if they're that advanced, how could we possibly have tricked them and done this? I said, because they're not gods. They're people. They make mistakes. Now, what is our kill rate? Kill rate meaning out of attempts to kill them, how often does it happen? It's very, very low. The one of the sites I was at in Jake Barber's helicopter, he said, well, this one site, we bring down 1 or 2 a year. But there are a lot more than that are embedded within trans-dimensional space-time that are around the Earth. So it isn't as if it's like an everyday occurrence, but it means that, let's say that you have a small craft like that. There are 3 or 4 ETs or NHI people, IBANs, they used to be called, extraterrestrial biological entities. And, they're asleep at the wheel but something happens where they take their eyes or minds off what's going on and they're in sort of a rest mode, and boom, in comes this invasive signal that is a combination of conscious thought with very advanced technology in the quantum entangled universe. We're going to need to do multiple podcasts on this for people to get their minds around it. But that is the foundation of the CE5 contact initiatives, which is Jake Barber and his people very much want to validate to the public that this is based on real science. This is based on real events. And if you look at the movie Close Encounters of the Fifth Kind, you'll see that. I mean, we've had up close and personal meetings with ETs that teleport in right in our circle of doing CE5. You'll see the pictures of them in the movie. Now, this has been known in the intelligence community since I first started this project publicly in 1990. I will say this, a big reason why General Stubblebine and those guys who had been involved in all the skullduggery dealing with remote viewing and UFOs and stuff, they offered me $2 billion in 1990 if I would defect from what my purpose was and join their team. And it was a serious offer. And people go, you've got to be kidding. I said, no, but this is why. They knew that we had figured out the Rosetta Stone of how to contact. And they wanted someone who was a medical doctor with knowledge of the brain and the body, and also had mastered these consciousness techniques to be on their team, right? Not on the team of peace. So that's true. And I chose peace and not the military approach. But people who are stuck in these black projects, they don't have a choice. They're going, this is what we're going to do. And they go, yes, sir. Right. So what we have to do also for these P3 operators, psionic operators, and this is what we're doing. The men that you saw gathered around Jake Barber, we took them and maybe another member of his team out to Joshua Tree to do a CE5 together. I think it was in July of 2024, a few months ago. And so we're trying to model this, but then instead of doing it in an aggressive way, and of course there's still some learning to be done on his team, we don't summon them. They're not called in like a valet for the, Earl of Downton Abbey or something, They're not just summoned. We do it as an invitational, but with the caveat, appear in any way that is safe and appropriate for this time and place. And we tell them that the Earth is an armed camp with advanced weapon systems that will target them. Now, let me pivot to one other thing that was a huge mistake in the show. They were talking about the when they were doing this and there was an egg-shaped craft that came in, there was a dogfight, one of them said, with another craft. No, those weren't two NHI craft. It was an ET craft and a man-made one, a disc out of the Lockheed Skunk Works that was deployed to intercept it and knock it down. So this is absolutely true. Now, people who've been on my team, like Raven and others for 25, 30 years, if I've seen that once, I've seen that 1,000 times, where we have vectored in and invited a craft to come in and foop, conventional aircraft, but also these weird man-made UFOs, UAPs come in, and then that object, because we've alerted them this could happen, vanish. They dematerialize. So we've seen this thousands of times, literally, over the last 35 years. So I think that there is also a learning curve for them to understand that you have multiple things going on at once. You have the human dimension, you have the non-human extraterrestrial craft and people, and then you have this dark operation that needs to be stood down immediately. This is in the executive order recommendations, where those weapon systems are turned down and off, and we pivot to a more diplomatic approach officially from the U.S. government, but also from governments around the world. And I'm advising people who are leaders in other countries that we're at that point where we need to come together as a people, as one world people, peacefully, and make contact with these civilizations for dialogue and for cultural exchange and for peaceful advancement of humanity as we become an interplanetary civilization. So that's where we need to take that sword of these psionic operators and turn it into that plowshare. But I just wanted to unpack some of the nuances that were kind of mushed together in the show and unpack it and provide some clarity. The purpose of this podcast is going to be, because this is going to pick up steam now. They've dropped one little bit of evidence and these guys' story, but it's going to keep rolling. I know what the plan is here. And what we're going to need to do each time that happens, they're going to be the echo chamber of the UFO community and the media, and particularly the lower end media, that will misinterpret things, distort things, or deliberately distort things. And in this case, in this show, I don't know if it was just a lack of knowledge and research on the part of the producers, or if it was a deliberate act of misinformation. It could be both. And I don't know, because I wasn't involved in that production at all whatsoever. In fact, I advised against it. But nevertheless, that's where we are. Now, what I think looking forward, and I'm always forward looking, is that footage of the retrieval of that egg-shaped craft, I know is the tip of a very big iceberg that's sitting there in a secure area. Again, the original plan is that we were going to get that and push it all the way out through every celebrity network, every podcast, the U.S. government, everything. But because they wanted to come forward personally to attribute it, they then started to ratchet it down to sort of a slow trickle, and then see, and this is what I've been told, see what the U.S. government does, see what the media does, see what the public does. And so they're sort of like sending up trial balloons, if you know what I mean, where you send up a trial balloon, see what's going to happen, see if it gets struck down. So I think for them, the group of people, and it's not just Jake Barber and the guys you saw, it's other people, are looking at that. Now, the best way...
Is that a sound strategy, Dr. Greer?
I'm sorry?
Is that a sound strategy?
It's not what I advise. And it isn't what some leaders in Europe and here in the United States who are very highly placed would have wanted to see. But this isn't my call. I mean, and I'm not the one who could be arrested or killed because I don't judge that. But I'm very direct and honest. I'd say, no, I would absolutely not do it that way. I think it's the most dangerous way to do it. And I think it's not effective, because if you really want to move the needle on this, you need more than a few seconds of a spherical egg or egg-shaped object starting to be moved underneath the helicopter. You need multiple corroborating people. You need to know the location. You need to unmask the operation. You need to unmask the corporate name, because I know what they are. I know which corporation he's associated with and what they were doing. Those hard drives, those tough books that he went missing, I know exactly what those were, what corporation they were lost from, and what's on them. Okay, a pretty good idea what's on them. Now, so I think that,
Can you tell us?
Yeah, well, it was very detailed information about these operations dealing with NHI and man-made craft at these test ranges that he was assigned to, right? And I've been over both of the test ranges that he works out of, out in the high desert, out west. So again, I've been over these facilities. I've known about them. What's interesting, he noted that in our archive, we had photos and information about both these facilities back in about 1994, 95. So before he was, I think he was still maybe in high school or just starting his career in the Air Force, when we had already been read in on that. So you kind of go full circle here. But on the other hand, it's a very big step forward to have someone who's actually been an operator on the retrieval teams. Now, one other huge mistake that's been made, and this is the most damning one, the most dangerous, let me say, was the facile and incorrect association with personal injury and radiation with NHI craft. Let me be blunt. This is bullshit. All right? So I want to unpack that for people. An interstellar vehicle is not using a nuclear power plant. The ones that are using nuclear power plants are ours. They're human. And this is not in question. In fact, Lieutenant Colonel Heckert, who is one of our disclosure witnesses, was on an operation when an object that was a nuclear-powered satellite-type object decompensated and came down in a remote part of the Yukon in Canada, and he's told us all, and he was part of that operation, and they covered it up because it was nuclear, and the thing was hot. Now, of course, Jake Barber says, well, we weren't suited up that it was hot, because, and if they knew it was radioactive, they would have told us. I hate to tell him, but ask all the Agent Orange victims from Vietnam if the command structure in these corporations and military really care if their frontline soldiers are harmed or not. I hate to be cynical, but here's a wake-up call. They don't give a damn. And if people get burned and killed and injured, to get it done now quickly, they'll do it. So you have multiple, let me unpack this for you now. You have multiple objects, both in space and in aircraft, that are nuclear, that we have, that are highly classified, not just United States, but Russia and China. You have nuclear power plants on satellites that every once in a while go bad, and they come down and they lose their orbit and they come in. That's kept very secret to prevent the public from being outraged. It'd be a scandal, because it's new. It's like a dirty bomb falling over some part of the world. Number two, we have had, and you can look this up, experimental craft, not anti-gravity, that are human, that are using nuclear power plants. And when those go bad and go wrong, it ain't pretty, right? Because it's nuclear, right? And then you also have the third and most bizarre category. And the great example of this, and go to the archive if you want, even as you're listening to me speak, if you have a dual screen, and look at the Cash Landrum case in Texas. And this happened decades ago, I believe in the 1980s. And this family, 5-year-old boy and his mom and I think his aunt were driving along a highway north of Houston. And suddenly this weird thing comes down, spewing all kinds of sparks and energy, and they didn't know it, radioactive waste. What was that? Well, we know from Air Force Office of Special Investigation source Doty that he was the principal investigator out of Kirkland Air Force Base at the time, but he was assigned that whole region in New Mexico, that was a man-piloted craft out of Area 51, Nellis, that was an ET craft that they could not figure out how to get the propulsion the energy system to work. So they stupidly put on one of these portable nuclear plants. The portable nuclear plant malfunctioned, and it spewed this radioactive material on these poor victims. And I might say, to this day, in a trajectory from that area of Texas north of Houston all the way to Fort Hood, it was spewing this stuff. So people who are in the fallout zone of that are still probably living on radioactive material. This is
Greer, I can hear the people on X right now saying, "Oh my God, Richard Doty! You're going to use Richard Doty as a source." So I want to put the question to you right now: why use Richard Doty as a source?
Well, look, he is a known disinformation person, but when we interviewed him, and you were there were certain things I knew enough about to get the correct answers from him, and I've heard that from other sources. He's not the only one. He's the only one that has said it on the record. So remember, for every person who says something like that on the record, I usually have 3, 5, 10 people who've been involved in projects where we have used these nuclear power plants on both things that look like UFOs, because we're trying to get them to work, aircraft, satellites. So this is not speculation. And then the question becomes, all right, if that has happened, and we can prove, it's a very well-proven medical case. Now, at the time, and until very recently, the UFO community could take that case and say, see, if you get contact with an NHI craft and the aliens, you're going to get burned. And this then brings me to this gentleman, Gary Nolan, who, interestingly, it was admitted in this show as a CIA contractor. And, of course, I discovered that the hard way about 10, 12 years ago, or 11 years ago, when he took the Atacama humanoid biological research and deliberately falsified it. And this can be proven, by the way. It's been proven by the top genetic genome sequencing people in the world that was completely done deliberately and properly, and was reported out as a deformed fetus. Now, I still don't know what the Atacama humanoid is. It's in our archive. You can go look at it. It most certainly was not a deformed fetus, because it had growth plates of a 6-year-old in it, even though it was only 6 inches long. We don't know what it was. But here's the problem. You have someone now under contract with CIA doing, quote, academic research to prove that UAP contact events leads to these horrible injuries. When we have, and you had found, this document from Jacques Vallée talking about how they were staging alien contact events by the CIA for their psychological warfare value about how harmful they were. So what's the agenda here? It's the agenda we exposed 30-some years ago, and that Carol Rosin said that Werner von Braun, who invented the rocket for Adolf Hitler, warned us of, and that they were going to try to create a specter of a threat from outer space. And the only way to do that is to falsely create evidence, or evidence that exists that the CIA and other operations have created, and then label it alien when it isn't. So they labeled the Cash Landrum thing alien when it was human error. They label many of the abductions as alien when it's been staged by covert programs. They label mutilations alien mutilations, and they're not. We know who's doing it. We know how they're doing it. It has nothing to do with NHI, extraterrestrial aliens. So that whole psychological warfare effort, which began in the 50s, is going apace today. And one of the problem with people who are whistleblowers who have lived in the sort of world of a very highly classified project, they come out into the subject of UFOs in the general public, and suddenly whatever they say can get folded and mutilated and folded into that false narrative. It happened to Grush. It's happened to many other people. I mean, all the way back almost 24 years ago, when we had the first national press club that was seen by 800 million people with 22 whistleblowers at the National Press Club here in Washington, May 9th, 2001. So this spring, it'll be a 24th anniversary. We had some of the people who had been at nuclear facilities where there had been these craft come in, and the famous case in Minot, North Dakota, where they took 18 intercontinental ballistic missiles offline. And of course, the people who were there told us they felt the ETs were saying, please don't blow up this beautiful planet. But if you're so crazy that you go to MAD, mutual assured destruction, which is our nuclear policy, one gets fired, they all get fired, and the whole world is gone, that we can intervene because we want peace and we want this civilization to continue. That's what they told me. Then you have someone, this Leslie Keene, come in, repackaged it, and went on a tour on CNN and everywhere else about the national security threat of the UFOs to our nuclear arsenal. Well, no. So you have one event, you have these events, and you have the truth about what was behind them, and then you have the spinmeisters in the media who turn it into the alien invasion threat. This has been a 70-year plan. And so one of the key things I'm going to do with this podcast is when there is information that's legit. Jake Barber is a patriot. He's legit. He was there. And it gets folded in either through error or lack of knowledge, or, as I say about this subject, a little knowledge is a dangerous thing. I don't know what went on with that production, but a little knowledge is a dangerous thing. So whether it's done by design and corruption, or whether it's done by just lack of enough knowledge, we have to clarify it, because the stakes are too high. Let me tell you what the stakes are here. This subject's going to come out now, and if it gets hijacked over and over again into these false narratives by nonsense, like contact with NHI UAPs, you're brain damaged and you're burned and this and that and the other thing, who's going to want to do CE5 contact if that's true? And it isn't true. But number two, it's going to pivot the politicians and the U.S. government into a war footing or a threat, national security threat footing, when there shouldn't be. It needs to be rolled over into a peaceful paradigm of contact and open dialogue. So these sort of efforts to subtly turn and, of course, gaslight the general public who might see this material on a tabloid show or whatever, that is a very dangerous thing. Now, I have shared, very frankly, with Jake Barber and others that I'm working with, that when that happens, I will come out and clarify it. And I'm not trying to be obstreperous, or somebody once called me a rock that won't move. No, because there's a singular purpose here, and that is to create a pathway in the human future that's peaceful, that involves a new world of new technologies, but doesn't pivot us from the current state where we're blowing each other up in all these regional wars and conflicts and religious hatreds, and just replace that with interplanetary war and conflict. But the kind of disinformation and manipulation of folding the narrative from we're doing contact, but we're going to then bring them in and kill them, right? That's not CE5 contact. You want to know what CE5 contact is? There's an app, go get it and practice it. You'll be astounded in what you see and experience. But also where, people have had contact with what? And I'll tell you right now, the biggest secret that they keep sanitizing out of this narrative, because the test ranges where Jake Barber has been operational, their primary purpose is not to down ET craft. It's to test the man-made ones he referred to rather obliquely, i.e. the aerospace companies' discs, triangles, and objects that are ours. I will tell you, absolutely, that is the big secret, not the extraterrestrial part of this. The big secret is that we have those technologies. They have been used illegally. They continue to be used illegally in everything from human trafficking to drug running to abducting and murdering people. those operations have to be stood down and stood down quickly. And that is the biggest part of the secret. Actually, the powers that be in these covert programs want everyone to believe that everything that goes bump in the night out there is alien, and it isn't. And that is part of the false flag. It is a key part of the deception, the grand deception. So I think that we're going to have to be very vigilant, those of us in the disclosure community and who are seeking the truth coming out in a way that redounds to a beautiful future, that creates a new world, as the ET said to Colonel Corso, and not let it get diverted into something that is a dystopian future of militaristic approach. Right now, there's a militaristic approach to the ETs that's been covert. It won't be advancement and it won't be disclosure if it just becomes an overt event where the governments of the world are united around an alien threat, and that the only way they can bring peace on this planet is to create a war of the worlds. I mean, this is not progress, my friends. So that is what we have to avoid. And the very subtle psyops of weaving truth and what Jake was saying is the truth, and with a sort of a narrative that subtly moves and introduces the idea of you have contact with NHI, you're damaged. So, when the other thing I want to talk about that, he was talking about at one point in the show, this beautiful, almost spiritual experience he had when he was retrieving an 8-gon, like an octagonal shaped object with some non-human intelligence associated with it. And that he has told me that story. He told me that story when I was with him in the chopper over these sites. And what was beautiful, it's a beautiful story. They go to a commercial break, and then they cut to where he's telling the story of picking up this crate, not the octagon, not the 8-gon, but this crate that was already boxed up. He had no idea what was in it when he got there. And that's what gave him radiation sickness and poisoning. What was in that crate? It was an NHI. It absolutely was one of these other misguided uses of a nuclear miniature propulsion and energy system that went bad, and they were trying to keep that very, very, very secret. Now, he didn't see what was in that crate, but I have this institutional and disclosure project witnesses like Colonel Heckert and others that have described those sort of operations. So this is where you have to be able to create the mosaic. So I'm going to end kind of where I started here, is that we have to create this disclosure mosaic. And the disclosure mosaic has to take into account the totality of the intelligence and information that we've garnished and gathered from hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people like Mr. Barber. So I think that is really what the big task is for us at the Disclosure Project. And each time there's information that gets folded into disinformation or misinformation, we're going to need to clarify it. And I just accept that as the where things are right now. And I think it'll be like that for some time. I just want people who follow what we're doing. I don't think this is going to get any simpler. There'll be attempts to hijack, just like they've hijacked these ET craft to knock them down instead of doing peaceful CE5. There's a constant attempt to hijack disclosure and bend it in the direction of conflict, false information, false narratives. And that's what we have to be vigilant of. And clearly, Gary Nolan doing things under contract from the CIA, or at least, that's what the host of the show said. It should give people pause. When was the last time anyone in academia did anything on behalf of the CIA that wasn't some kind of skullduggery and psyop? I can't think of any case. So I think that, someone like that saying, well, yeah, we're studying all these terrible injuries due to the contacts with NHI and the aliens. No, they're not. They're documenting the harm and the damage that have been done to people like Jake Barber by human contact with human experimental craft where they've been injured, or where they've been deliberately targeted for an abduction or a vivisection or a mutilation. So that is a very horse of a different color. But you can see that with the public not knowing what the human capabilities are, and this is a big liability right now in what is known here. I'm looking at the White House right here. The paucity, the shortage of information about all of this is a national security risk. It is a huge problem because this is going to come out. And if it comes out with that kind of narrative, we're going to be at World War III. It'll be mass panic. It'll be 1,000 times worse than 9/11 or COVID in terms of the missteps. And I have said it that bluntly to the incoming administration's senior people. Now, whether they'll listen, I don't know. My fate in life is to, I liken this to, Michael. I've had it more than once, unfortunately. Someone comes in with a massive heart attack, and they don't like to be in hospitals. Who does? I mean, I didn't like it when I had all my trauma last year. But they say, well, I'm going to leave. And you got a 12-lead EKG showing a massive heart attack in the left ventricles. It's called the widowmaker that actually kills you. I said, if you leave, you're going to die. They say, well, I'm going to be fine. I don't want to be here. And they get up on you. You can't arrest them and hold them there forcibly. They get out, and I've had them drop dead in the parking lot or 4 hours later at home, and they're brought in code blue dead. Now, my experience with this subject is that just as a medical doctor and an emergency and trauma guy, you can advise and you can say, here where the landmines are, they're going to blow you up. Doesn't mean they're going to listen. Now, if they listen, good. If they don't, that's on them. So all I can do and all any of us can do is the following. Please write to the incoming president. He's inaugurated in a few hours, tomorrow, Monday at noon, I believe. And to your 2 senators, and to your representative in the House of Representatives. If you're in other countries, write to your leaders and your parliament members or whatever you have, and ask that they implement peaceful contact with these civilizations, but that they also implement the executive orders that we are recommending for witness protection, amnesty for these people, physical protection, and standing up a law enforcement effort here and abroad to bring to rein, to stand down these odious programs that are targeting ET crap and engaging in all this false flag operations dealing with abductions and what have you. So the only way people are going to act is that this needs to become a crescendo that builds from the public. Many, many members of Congress have said, yeah, but we're not hearing from people on this. So take responsibility. I can't do everything. My team can't do everything. Jake and his guys who are risking their lives, and they are genuinely courageous, wonderful patriots. They need your help. We need your help. So I would say, we say we live in a democracy. Let's act like it. Now, we know that the democracy's been hollowed out, but maybe it's hollowed out because we, the people, aren't doing what we should be doing, right? We should be screaming from the rooftops to get this done properly. And I can't do it by myself, and a handful of people can. The whistleblowers can't do it by themselves because they're coming from a milieu, an environment of a very specific, narrow, highly compartmented operation. They're not experts on all these other issues, and they'll admit that. It's an enormously complex problem. It's multidimensional chess here. So, we have to understand that about the whistleblowers, and they're not accustomed to dealing with the free-for-all known as the media and the UFO subculture and politics and all that. They're special operators. So we can only expect from them what they can do. And that should be enough. Now, so what we're going to do as information comes out, whether it's on News Nation or CNN or the New York Times, if it gets folded into false information, we're going to expose that. But we're going to take the real information, put it together, and then continue to deliver it to the people who need to see it. So, for example, the information that came out last night, we're getting the key part of it, and I'm providing it because I have to be at some things tonight. here in Washington with most of the key people coming into the White House. So that's what I have to do, and that's why I needed. Thank you, Michael, for the little summary that you put together. And just say a prayer that all this goes right. And I would say also say a prayer and put guidance around Jake Barber and his family and that whole team, that they're guided to right action, they're protected, and that this is the beginning of a much, much bigger process of truthful disclosure. And hopefully we can minimize the damage from the peanut gallery and the disinformation specialists that inevitably are going to hijack this information and spin it in untoward and damaging ways. So we have to make a distinction between the data, the information, the evidence, and the direct witness testimony, and how it might be intercepted and then altered. And I know I sound very clinical about that, but I have to be very clear about that, because otherwise this is where your whole purpose gets sidebarred and goes into left field and goes sideways. So that's our big challenge. It's my big challenge. I think it's all of our big challenge, and we need to be vigilant, all of us, ever vigilant about this as this picks up speed.